Hello, I'm Hayden Bluefield and welcome to this week's episode of Benevolent Business. Firstly, before we kick in, if you could do me a huge favour and make sure to subscribe or follow whatever platform you're listening to Benevolent Business on this week, please. It does so much to help the podcast reach out and, of course, help guests get the conversations out as well to help them. And, of course, make sure to like, review, leave a comment, let us know your thoughts, what could be better, what did you enjoy, what value did you take away from this conversation. And with this week, we have Laura O'Sullivan, and this is where the true value of podcasting is, to be able to hear extraordinary achievements from people. Laura, who is a multi-award winning scientist, achieving those accolades at the age, wait for it, of 16. At 16, she had won awards in science for her work in the industry. So, of course, I had to ask all about that. I discovered Laura, because you may not have heard of her, but I discovered Laura through Exponential by Azeem Azhar. If you haven't read it, I'd recommend. It's a great book. So make sure to check that out and give it a read, because you also hear more about Laura's story in there. But of course, once I heard about the story of Laura from Azeem, I wanted to reach out and hear more in her own words and invite her on the podcast. She was up for it, so let's dive straight in.
Discussing this in school, like, what are you considering doing? And I mentioned that, and they just kind of looked at me as if I had three heads. I suppose it just hit a little bit hard that this was, the health system, that, it's supposed to be saving lives when this wasn't the case in this situation. Someone had already passed away as a result of cervical cancer, so it was quite a shocking scandal at the time. And
Laura, welcome to Benevolent Business. Thank you for coming on.
Well, thank you for having me.
First thing to kick off, I am not going to be able to say it as well as you. So you obviously know why I've reached out to you. I was reading. Oh, actually, I brought it with me. I was reading.
Oh, yes.
Azeem Azhar, and obviously your name popped up where you mentioned your scientific breakthrough, to which, as I said, I'll try and explain, but you'll do a much better job. So can you just give us the sort of outline of what your breakthrough was?
Basically, so this happened in, what year? I was 16 at the time, so it would be in 2018? Yes, sorry, time is a bit of a blur, but yeah, that would make sense. So I was interested in machine learning at the time. I'd already done a project for this specific, so it was for the BT Young Scientist, so it's like an exhibition for secondary school students in Ireland. So I think there are about 550 projects every year that enter in different categories of science, and I suppose it's competition, but it's also, I suppose, a way to, try out a project. So not everyone is there to win, but there are other people who are there to, give it a go and things like that. So it's very, I don't know, I did it a few times and I really enjoyed it. And I'd done a machine learning project when I was 15. Well, I just turned 16 maybe a month before the exhibition, but had done the work when I was 15, if that makes sense. I'd looked at exoplanet detection. I had gone to, it's called the International Space University. They have it's like a summer program. I don't know if it's still running with COVID, but they held it in Cork one year. Now it's for masters, maybe even PhD students to attend, so I wasn't quite fitting that, but they had all their talks available to the public, so I went to a couple of them as it was something to do during the summer, and it's quite cool to see that they're hosting it in Cork. It's not a huge city, and not a lot of things like this happen, so it was very nice just to go along and see what's happening. And one of the talks had been on exoplanets, and I thought, that's a cool thing, and I got interested in that, and I decided I was looking for another machine learning project, and I'd come across, obviously, in 2018 there was a huge issue with cervical cancer screening in Ireland. It had come about that there were a whole lot of people who had false negatives read in their samples, I suppose above the normal false negative rate, and a lot of them had gone on to develop cervical cancer, unfortunately, and it would have been seen, I suppose it could have been prevented earlier had the samples not been false negatives. And it was quite a horrifying thing at the time that something like cervical cancer screening, it's quite a, I suppose it's a very, I suppose, how do you phrase this? It's a reliable enough screening process that it also works very well that if you catch abnormalities early, that it's cervical cancer can be prevented pretty easily that way. That it's, I suppose, but the fact that something like this could happen, and I suppose a lot of women had been very badly affected, and their families at that stage, some women had already passed away as a result of cervical cancer, so it was quite a shocking scandal at the time, and it's still, I suppose it's still somewhat playing out, but so this was something that I thought maybe there was a way that I could look at artificial intelligence, particularly from the false negative point of view, as I suppose in something like screening, yes, you want to have the best accuracy as possible, and you want to reduce both false positives and negatives, but false negatives are a lot more serious than false positives, in the sense that, I suppose, if you miss a positive sample, yes, as you could say, someone could go on to develop abnormalities or cancer later on, and when it's such a preventable disease, that this is probably more better, and especially, like, I suppose we're in this, for Ireland, where, I don't know, access to healthcare isn't as much of an issue as maybe in other countries where cervical cancer screening might be done differently, but So for Ireland, like if you have, okay, maybe it comes to it that it was a false positive, that there was maybe a little bit more invasive than needed, but given the circumstances, false negatives are better to be reduced. So that's how, I suppose, my focus of the project. So I found a data set from a hospital in Denmark. It was just an open source data set of a couple of hundred images of different cell samples, normal and abnormal. It wasn't too easy to come across data like this, but fortunately I did come across one data set. I suppose that is one issue with projects like this. It was quite a small data set. It was a couple of hundred images, and they also had more abnormal than normal, but I wanted to replicate the more, I suppose, realistic scenario where I think currently it's about 95% normal and 10% abnormal, and that's likely to be reduced over the years with the, I don't know what year Ireland introduced it, but a couple of years ago we brought in the HPV vaccine, so that should reduce cervical cancer and also, I suppose, abnormalities developing. So I wanted to focus on, I suppose, replicating the more realistic scenario that if artificial intelligence were to be implemented, that this is how, I suppose, it would be dealing with. There's no point showing it mostly abnormal cells if that's not what it's going to see. So I didn't get a huge data set out of that. So I first just ran some algorithms. So I'd done some convolutional neural networks. So they're used for, I suppose, image processing. So I ran model, I think, 3 layers of that. However, due to the size of my data set, it wasn't running so well, and it wasn't, I suppose it was overfitting, so it was fitting to the training set, but not so well, I suppose, generalizing the problem of the test set. So I implemented it's called BGG16, so it's transfer learning. So this model has been trained on millions of images, and so I implemented that in my data set, and that was, I suppose, getting better results. It wasn't overfitting. So I suppose that was one slight flaw of the project, that it wasn't something that I could control. Unfortunately, I do not have access to data like this, and it's not easy to come by. So the next step I decided to look at was to see if I could replicate more images of my data set. So what I did is I tried it's called a generative adversarial network, where it replicates images of basically what I did is I replicated new images of the normal class based on the original images. So it basically is a neural network that tries to learn basically how to replicate images of the original images. Now, unfortunately, due to time constraints, I didn't get to code that myself, but I did use an open software, one from GitHub, that was open source, and the images, they weren't great, to be honest, but for the purpose of my project and out of interest, I did use them, and I was able to get a better data set, which did have better results. So I suppose I'm not currently familiar with, I know there's great work being made on areas like this where you can replicate, like, some of the images I've seen nowadays of artificial intelligence and the things that they replicate. Like, it's quite incredible that things like this, they could be a huge area of focus, but obviously my little project, it wasn't going to be groundbreaking. But yes, that's basically what I did. So yeah, it was successful at reducing the false negative rate. So I was able to put weights on the different classes, that I suppose it basically focused more on getting the abnormal classes right than the normal, if that makes sense.
One thing that I take away from this, it's only recently I've started trying to learn more about artificial intelligence and done some studying, watched videos, read books. And so I feel like from it's not a huge amount of study, but I've like things you're saying, I'm picking up, and I'm like, my brain's really having to work to like put into context everything you're saying. But you did this at 16, so that's not something on the curriculum. I mean, I didn't go to school in Ireland, but I'm pretty sure that on the curriculum in Ireland, they're not saying like, welcome to like nursery school, we're going to start with artificial intelligence, so that by the time you're 16 you can have these scientific breakthroughs. So where did that come from? Where did you start learning about artificial intelligence?
As you said, nothing of this done in school. We, unfortunately, now I think I'm not sure exactly, but I know from my year group, I was the first year group where they were bringing a trial subject of computer science in about 40 schools across the country. But apart from that, there's very limited coding or any computer science or anything. Particularly, I was in an all-girls school. Ireland has I don't know, but definitely in like bigger towns and cities, Ireland has single-gender schools. So I know for a fact my brother did coding as a first-year module, some sort. I'm not really sure the details, but I certainly didn't do anything like that. My school would have dreamt of doing that. So there was definitely that bit of lack of, I suppose, connection with the technology. But I had come across on the internet, and I'd seen it, and I was like, what is this? You know, a lot of the headlines will kind of portray it as absolute magic, and I was very curious what it is. And I suppose I was always interested in maths, but I sometimes found there was a disconnect between what I was doing. Like, okay, yes, I know how to solve a quadratic equation. I could do a little. I suppose at the time I hadn't done much calculus, but I could do some maybe geometry, things like that. That I enjoyed it, but I didn't quite understand maybe how that. Because I was always told maths is a very good topic, like something to study, and I was considering studying it, but the disconnect between what you can do with it and I suppose where it can lead you and what I was currently doing at school. So once I come across machine learning, I thought, oh, this is actually quite cool. So I kind of studied the maths behind it. Now, it was quite I suppose the main issue I actually found was a lot of the notation was very, I suppose I'd never come across like the sum notation, things like that, and I found it quite hard. Originally, it was a bit of a learning curve to grasp it, but I had found some very good articles on medium.com that just explains it in words that were very basic example of how it really just comes down to basic maths and simple cost functions and like linear regression, for example, just how basic that actually ends up. And I was very fascinated by how simple yet powerful something small like that. Now, obviously, there are many more developments that have been made since linear regression or logistic regression that I suppose built upon it, but I suppose at the core of it, basics that I found were just, bringing it to simple maths that I suppose really made things come alive for me. I suppose I think it was, I suppose, the first time I realised, wow, okay, this is cool, this is maths, I'm seeing really cool things it can do. So I suppose that's where my interest came into it, and it developed from there. I did some courses on, I don't know actually about it, is it Coursera or Coursera? It's like an online platform for... Yes. So I started on that. It's an 11-week course. It's, I suppose, quite a popular one, and it went through. Now, it was more from the, I suppose, the mathematics side from it, and not really the coding. I know I've seen since, I'm not familiar exactly which ones, but some courses, they do it backwards, where they get you to implement the machine learning and then teach you the maths behind it, which I'm sure is a process, but I know for a fact from my personal point of view, I much prefer just focusing on the theoretical side of it, especially as I'd never come across it. I hardly knew what I was doing with it, so I really wanted to get a better understanding before I even touched it. So yeah, I suppose that's where it started, and then from there I just built upon what I needed to know. So once I got the grounding, okay, focus, I don't need this aspect because, like, for example, supervised or unsupervised learning, it was a supervised learning project, so I didn't need unsupervised learning, if that makes sense. So I just then focused on, I suppose, what I needed, and once I found, oh, this is something I'm coming across but I don't know anything about, I'll learn it. And at the time, I didn't really have great coding skills either, or at all, really, if I'm honest. So that was something I tried to focus on as well, trying to figure out how to actually code it. It's great if I know how to do the maths, but I'm not obviously going to do it out by hand. So that was something that came, I suppose, side by side, that I just built up through mostly the internet. I also used a book. Oh, can I remember the name of it? It was can't remember. It was basically so it was written by the author of not author, I suppose, creator of a library called Keras. It's, I suppose, a well-known machine learning library. Yes, deep learning with Python. And so I found that very good. That a book is maybe a bit more traditional, but I did find it went through a lot of. So I had already, I suppose, done it started off with the mathematics and stuff that I'd already done, so I kind of skipped that chapter, but it went into more detail. And so a lot of things I found on the internet, I couldn't really understand how to actually apply it sometimes. It wasn't really piecing together the theory and the coding part, and I found that very good that they kind of came together, that it was both explanation and examples, and that's, I suppose, the later stages of the project when developing it, that's how I pieced it together, I suppose. So online and that one book. But yeah, without the internet, none of this would be possible.
So yeah, online learning, books, and just your own incentive, your own initiative to go online and research. So where, with the issue in cervical, in the smears and everything, and the test results and the high chances of false negatives.
Yes.
So was that isolated to Ireland, or is this something that happens like the world over? And also, why was that so prevalent for you? What is it that? Why was that the issue that you wanted to solve? Because I can't imagine as a 16-year-old that would be. I don't know. Maybe it is something that you're starting to talk about, or something that started coming up in school.
I mean, the specific scandals in Ireland, and I suppose it was just seeing the fact that the Irish health system had failed. And now there were other aspects that weren't quite related to the whole false negatives, that a lot of this had been maybe not dealt with properly, that a lot of the women hadn't been told, things like that, and this was kind of building up. And I suppose also as a woman in Ireland, that it was a specific female health issue, and I suppose it just hit a little bit hard that this was the health system, that it's supposed to be saving lives when this wasn't the case in this situation, and it was I suppose something, and I suppose I wasn't really aware of cervical cancer screening at the time, but then when I looked into it, how simple it is, but effective, but that we also managed to, I suppose, mistakes with that, and sparked something that this was something to look into.
Something that you'd seen the headlines on the news and such,
Yeah,
and
it was quite the scandal at the time.
yeah. Oh, okay. So that's where obviously it resonated with you, as it's a scandal around women and the false negatives, and that's obviously relevant to you. So it's something that you took up from the news, hugely relevant to you, and therefore took it upon your mission. You've mentioned, or in Azeem's book, it mentions about like the camps. So you went on like coding camps and stuff. Was all of this just your own initiative, your own desire, or is this, in terms of really working that academically, is this something that you was influenced from like teachers, parents kind of thing, or is it just since you've known yourself, you've just always been driven that academically?
My parents were always supportive. Like, they both did STEM subjects in university. They both did engineering, so I suppose they were always supportive of me doing something. I could see they were like, that I suppose, an understanding of what STEM was, and I think I always enjoyed maths. I maybe wasn't the most dedicated student when I was maybe in primary school, but the one subject that I always liked to engage with was maths, and it was easy, and I could do a bit of a challenge. I could get through the exercises pretty quickly. There was always a bit of a challenge. Even throughout secondary school, there was always someone I was trying to, get done the questions quicker than them. So it was always something I liked, the challenge and getting to think, and I suppose different areas. And yeah, I suppose compared to, in primary school we would have done English and Irish. I never quite engaged with them, or to be honest, really cared. Whereas maths was always the one that stuck. So I suppose that's what led me to the more scientific, as I don't know if I think they're trying to change it, but when I was in primary school, we did little to no science. I think we did an iodine experiment with a potato once, but apart from that, there was no real science. So I suppose science wasn't something I really properly encountered till I was 12, but I kind of, at that stage, was made aware that, this is something you'd like, especially as someone who's into maths. So I suppose, and I had the support of my parents. It was all just online one, because as I was saying, the Coder Dojo, my friend used to do it, so I was like, I might join her, it sounds fun, but it sounds really bad. I hope my mother doesn't mind me saying this. She originally went into electrical engineering, but then she's now teaching in IT management, so it's like, I suppose, cloud computing, things like that. She doesn't really do much code, and it's more, I suppose, she's lecturing, so that's more the focus of her job. But she did felt that maybe it was hitting a little too close to home, that she didn't want it to look like she was forcing her, I suppose, job on me. That, it is a common thing that sometimes you see that people, like, it's not a problem, but sometimes I suppose children end up, you can't say much for myself, I've done computer science. Well, I've done the computer science and math, I suppose it's a different area. I would have liked if there was more guidance from teachers, and definitely in secondary school I found it was very poor. I don't know, was it just our school, or talking to others, maybe it was the issue of being in a girls' school, that there was no, there was good focus on science. I would say a lot of my year group would have gone, but they went into more of things like biology, and maybe one or two went to chemistry. A good few went into engineering, actually, but I was definitely the only one who went into computer science, and there was definitely, knowing a lot of people that just didn't really understand what it was, like, they just didn't quite engage or know what, I suppose, like, definitely talked to other people when I mentioned, we should obviously be discussing this in school, like, what are you considering doing, and I mentioned that, and they just kind of looked at me as if I had three heads. There's definitely, I suppose, that isn't a problem. I don't think everyone should go into computer science, but there's definitely a lot of people I think should, certainly, even just in, knowing that there's an option of going into degrees like that. And definitely with girls, there's sometimes this idea that doing something maybe more hands-on, like even if you did, I suppose, computer science, you can do a lot of practical courses with that, but I don't know. That's what I found anyway, that sometimes we're not quite... I don't know, is that something that we're taught, or is that just something developed, that sometimes people learn? A lot of girls don't feel like they don't feel like maybe that they want to do something practical, but that might also be due to the fact we don't have any subjects like that, so they're only engaging with maybe less practical subjects. I suppose the most practical subject we did was art, which is a bit different to the practical side of computer science. So yeah, definitely would have, the lack of school influence was definitely unfortunate, but there wasn't much I could do about it, I suppose.
If you are in school, so obviously the school structure's there for everyone to go into, and this is the rules you're supposed to follow, and this is the subjects you're supposed to study, and you've taken something there, it's incredibly academic, but you've sort of leaned away from what the academic structure is when still in school, and then pursued this subject on, well, really doing a lot of good work to impact the lives of many people around you. So what would your advice be there to someone that is in school, college, university, that's still in education? You're in university now, but what would your advice be to someone that's in education, that's sort of got this idea they want to pursue that's more of a passion and it doesn't really fit the structures of academia, would you advise then to sort of pursue your passion, or would it depend on what the subject is? Because obviously you've gone down something very academic, whereas for me, like when I was in school, I really enjoyed art, I enjoyed science, but I really enjoyed skateboarding. So I spent a lot of my free time just off skateboarding. But then it'd be very unwise to sort of start taking a lot of energy away from school to focus on that. So how would you advise someone that's got a passion that wants to lean away and not focus so much academically on their schooling?
It's an interesting question. Is I suppose, how do I rephrase this? I haven't always been I haven't been 100% dedicated to academics. Like I play ice hockey as well, so it was something I started. I was 12. I liked skating. We don't have ice rinks in Ireland, but we have little mini kind of Christmas ones, and I just decided to turn up one day when they were training there, and I thought I'd give it a go. So that's been, I suppose, I've been doing those simultaneously. So I definitely would say that it is good to pursue your passions, but there's always a balance. Well, I was able to personally find a balance. It might depend on what the subject is, but I definitely wouldn't agree with purely dedicating yourself to something academic. If that's not what you want, at the end of the day, there's no point doing something. If you don't want to do it, then why are you doing it? Now, there's obviously a limit to that it'll get you somewhere. However, I suppose it doesn't have to be your whole life, that you shouldn't be giving up on something that you find enjoyable. But I suppose from the more something that's not in I suppose curriculum, for me personally, it was lucky. Now it depends on the topic, but there are so many resources out there, and I was able to find the BT Young Scientist. My school didn't have a great tradition of doing it at the time. There were maybe 2 projects a year, whereas other schools would have a lot more projects, and I suppose. But the option was still there, so I thought I'd give that a go. There was also, I suppose, in Ireland, that's more of a thing. So I did it's called transition year. So we have this year between our equivalent to the GCSE, so junior cert, and then the leaving cert, so A levels. There's this year in the middle where it's not really an academic year. It's more focused on projects, and we had taster. It's a bit of a weird year, to be honest. We did some school trips. I'm not really sure what else was actually, because a lot of it is. There are a lot of programs you can do that are more not just inside school, but outside school. So I did VTech Scientist. I also did work experience weeks. There was a couple of competitions that I did with some friends that were we did an app making competition. It was with I don't know, are you familiar with MIT App Inventor? It's like Scratch but for apps. It's basically what it is. It was very basic. It was just pieces of code together. It was good actually introduction to app development, but there were little things like that. However, I suppose that was the way the Irish education was set up for that. Was it handy that I was able to do things that year? But I would assume in other education systems in other countries there are similar things that I suppose just give them a go. If you see something, there's bound to be someone in the school that may not be familiar with it, but might be able to guide you through it. That if you need maybe a reference point from a teacher, that they can help you, or even just if you go into a competition and you need someone to, I suppose, put your name forward, things like that. So I would always say, I suppose, the internet has a huge resource of things. If there is a way to find a community, because sometimes, you're not quite sure what you want to Google, but you're interested in these things, it's good to, I suppose, try meet people if you can. I did maths enrichment classes, so they're not quite training for maths Olympiads. The option was there. I didn't personally go for it in the end. I was more there just to learn the maths. I suppose it was at a college level, but I met people at that, finding out what they were doing. It was interesting to see, that's something I can do, I can try, things like that, and I suppose you never know what you can find. It's easier said than done, but trying to find like-minded people can help get out there. Just give it a go, really, and at the end of the day, if that's what you want to do, it's good to follow your passions and at least give them a go. Especially when you're younger, it's something you're just doing on the side, you're still doing your education. It's the time to try things, if that makes sense. And same, I suppose college is a bit of a different, or university is a bit of a different story.
So you're saying to someone in that situation is keep your hand in at school, do the work that's necessary, but you have got the ability, especially more in school, more so than you have as you get older, but you've got the ability to just mix around and have a go at all these different things, experiment, which I think the older you get, if you've got an age range where you say you're still in school, you won't be able to experiment so much when you're in college or uni, but then I think as you get older and older, you'll be like, you can still experiment when you're in college and uni, and then you become like a full-grown adult, and you're like, you can still experiment. So experiment things, follow your passions, and I think the biggest piece of value you mentioned there is to find like-minded people, and whether that's in person or online, because you've got things like just Reddit and Discord, website platforms you can go on, literally type in a subject, and there is a whole array, a whole community there that people are talking about and having conversations around the same thing. And you have that with like Facebook groups and stuff. And even with Discords, I've known of people to have huge success and find their career just off of the back of being involved. Like an old mate of school.
Wow.
Yeah, I've got an old mate from school who is just part of a Discord he likes like motocross gaming, and he was just involved in the conversations. And so he just started a YouTube channel based off the fact that he was having these conversations. So he would share his experiences and share the information. And now he's pretty much leveling out what he earns at work. He's pretty much earning from YouTube now, and it's like this is all just because he was part of an online community having a conversation, and he's taken that and put it on another platform.
Wow, that is amazing.
Yeah, it can work out really well for people. So a key piece there, I'd say, from what you said was like finding like-minded people, even like podcasting and YouTube. Like with me creating content, I found the same thing of finding other people that have done it, like my old mate from school, just asking them for tips and ideas, and when things don't work out so well, being like, oh, what's gone wrong here? And they can oftentimes say, yeah, I made that mistake many times ago, like here's how to avoid it. I'd love to go into the actual awards. I'm just gonna sort of, on my notes I've got like, obviously you won, and what Azeem mentioned in the book, you won a scientific award for your research and your work, the results you achieved. Can you talk me through what that award is and what it kind of meant for you? Because like obviously reading in the book is like you've won an award, and that's like amazing. But what is this award specifically?
Okay, so the way the Young Scientist is structured, so you've got your different categories. So there's chemical, physical, and mathematical, which was the one I was in. There's also technological. Now, I suppose my project was between the two, but I suppose coding kind of went between the two as well, but I decided chemical, physical, and mathematical. And I also didn't have a product. A lot of the technology ones had products. There were a few machine learning ones as well, kind of between the two, but I was in the chemical, physical, mathematical one anyway. There's also biological, ecological, and social and behavioural. So the four, I suppose, general areas of science. For each of them, there are 3 age groups as well. So junior, intermediate, and senior. So in Ireland and secondary school, there are 6 years. So it was first and second year or junior, third and fourth or transition year in the intermediate, and fifth and sixth in the senior. So basically, so that gives you 3 in each category, and there's 4, so 12 basically categories of awards you can win depending on what age group and what section you're doing. And for each one there was first, second, and third. Sorry, I don't know if that makes sense, but yeah. So I won 3rd place in the senior chemical, physical, mathematical. Oh yeah, there's also there's individual projects and there's also group projects. That was one of the awards I won, but they also have special awards. They're sponsored by different companies. The one I got was for the Health Research Board. I think they're the ones, they're the people who I think you apply to them if you're looking for a research grant. Funnily enough, I was with my aunt at the time. She was out of work at the time, so she was able to accompany me. She's an occupational therapist, so very, very different area of. But I think she'd done some research, like grads for that, because she worked at university. So she was having. It was interesting. She loved the social behavioural projects. I don't know. It was just interesting the dynamic between us, the difference. I got to meet. Someone from the Health Research Board. He presented the award to me and then came to me to the stand the next day, and I also did a quick phone call with them a few weeks after after the exhibition. They had a little article on their website. So yeah, so like there are lots of different companies, and they'll all be kind of more specific. Like this was a health application one, so it wouldn't just be any project winning it, if that makes sense. So yeah, they were the 2 awards I won.
Having won that award, do you feel a pressure now in anything you do academically, in terms of, do you feel a pressure, I guess, that you have to do something specifically academic or something as significant, or do you feel quite relaxed about it?
Up and down, yeah, no, I've definitely, I suppose, yeah, no, it can feel a bit pressure. There's one, have I peaked too early? Is there something more should I be challenging myself more when I'm at university? How do I balance this? And it's been, I suppose, it hasn't helped that last year was a bit of a mess, and there has been a bit of a learning curve to university that I wasn't quite expecting, so there is that feeling in the back of my head sometimes, but I have no answer to it yet, is the problem. I confess I really don't know where I'm going with my life. It was always, the focus when I was younger, it was always like getting to university and deciding what I wanted to do there, and I wasn't very decisive in my decision. In the end, the reason I chose computer science and maths, and also at Edinburgh, was I couldn't decide between the two, and I didn't want to do them individually, if that makes sense. I like the overlap, which I'm actually, the more I'm doing my degree, I really like that. Basically in my head, I'm getting the best of both worlds. I get to cherry pick what I like, and also in Edinburgh they have good flexibility. If I change my mind, I could have changed realistically into any computer science degree or any other maths. No, maybe not another like I couldn't switch to computer science and physics, for example, as I wasn't doing the physics, but the more general maths or computer science degrees I could switch into. So there was definitely a lot of, I suppose, indecisiveness, and now I'm getting to a stage where, like, computer science and maths, a lot of doors are open to me, but I don't know what door I want to take, if that makes sense. There is always the feeling, am I doing as much as I can? But to be honest, at this stage, I'm just trying to tell myself, do things that I'm enjoying. Don't stress too much. I have years of life hopefully ahead of me, that it's never too late to start things. If I see something, I'm going, yes, that's something I'd like. And I am trying to do a couple of things on the side. I'm doing it's only small. It's only maybe a couple of hours a week, and it's flexible. It's like an internship for, it's a startup in Ireland. They do language learning books that you learn in context. So if you've got a sentence, the dog sat on the wall. So if you're learning maybe basics of language, they translate the word dog and maybe the word wall or something like that, you'd learn these words in context, and you'd see them over and over, and at the end of each chapter there'd be a translation, but at the time you don't see the translation, but the idea is that you pick it up. So it starts off with the basics, like I, so you can pick up pretty quickly in context that you're speaking about I, and then it builds up the difficulty. So I suppose that's something I've been doing a little bit. So there are a lot of, it turns out I actually started this through, I'd seen it on LinkedIn, and they were looking for a German copy editors, and I was like, oh, I'd done a bit of German when I was at school, and I'd gone to Germany for 3 weeks, and I really enjoy German. I love languages, or learning them, so I thought, hey, this might be something to try during the summer. And it was kind of, again, this only started off as a few hours a week. It was very chill, but then it turns out once they talked to me, they were like, oh, you're a computer science student, wait a minute, we actually have something else that we might want you to do. So I've ended up on the more algorithm side of it. So we're, I suppose, doing the I suppose the idea is that eventually, because currently it's just producing books, so like there are specific books for specific languages and their specific levels. So like you can only get Alice in Wonderland in a certain number of languages, and they're generally the same difficulty, I think. Whereas the idea is eventually that there's a platform, you just say what level, what language, and what book you want. So they're all kind of, currently they're like ones out of copyright, so Alice in Wonderland, Great Gatsby, Wizard of Oz, things like that. So there's a lot of algorithms that are working behind the process, and it's just building it up to that stage. So yeah, I did that. It was, I don't know, just interesting the way that happened, because I originally signed up for the German part of it, and I was like, oh, okay, I'm doing something else. But yeah, so I think that's, I don't know, it mightn't be too intensive. I know some people are very dedicated to things and they're getting involved in things, but I like the idea that in university it's a chance for me to try things new and get to know other people. It's nice to get out. There's so many people. I find it overwhelming sometimes. So many different people from so many different parts of the world. My life, I suppose, I guess I was just in a regular school in Ireland. You had people from different countries, but there wasn't really that international. And the same with Irish universities. We wouldn't have the same international cohort as somewhere like Edinburgh would. So yeah, sometimes I do feel maybe I'm not doing as much, but at the end of the day, if I'm enjoying it and I'm at least trying to, it's hard to do stuff when I'm not really sure where I even want to go with myself. So I think at this stage it's just gaining different experiences and seeing where I go from there, really.
Amazing. Well, you've definitely learned the art of jumping on opportunities, as you said, going for looking at an internship that's just to do with German, and suddenly you're involved in deep computer science elements of it. So you touched there on loving languages. So how many languages do you speak then? Obviously English, so you speak German.
I mean, it depends on what level, but I mean, my 4 main ones would be English, German. I also speak Irish. It's, I suppose, an essential part of the Irish education system, although I haven't spoken it 2 years that much, although I'm finding if I'm a little burnt out or I'm a little tired, sometimes the Irish will come out. I haven't quite figured out why that is happening. It's quite unusual. But and there's also French as well. That wouldn't be at the same level, so I did it for 3 years in school, and I took it as an optional this semester. So it's kind of, I'm hoping to get my French up to a certain level. But I know I like the, I suppose I'd be very, close to home with my languages, but I'm hoping to slowly build them up now. I do find I have the interest, but not always the time and the motivation to make myself, and unfortunately, compared to the the learning of the coding and the maths online and stuff like that, I haven't found as good resources with the languages. Like, I didn't like Duolingo that much. It just felt like a game eventually, and I got quite sick of it. Now, I didn't feel like I was learning, but I don't know, maybe, my personal learning languages is just different to the online. And I've done some courses where, I find sometimes if it's too easy, I just get bored. Like, I did French this semester. Now, from a point of view, it was great. It only took a few hours a week, but I could have easily compressed half of what we did into maybe 3-4 weeks, and I don't know, it just wasn't that challenging. So I do find that myself with learning languages, I'm either bored or just not feeling like I'm learning, and I'm struggling to find the midpoint. But I do try, like, I suppose I've been going to there's language cafes out of my university, things like that, and I'm also interested in linguistics, and I'm hoping maybe that is an area I could look into. I suppose there's a nice overlap between linguistics and computer science, that this is something I could pursue maybe in the future. But I've always just, I suppose, the way the different languages are structured and the way that you can, I suppose, suddenly communicate, the way you even think, sometimes I find, definitely with German, with the awkward word order, that sometimes I'm a bit more decisive and just blunt in German, but because that's easier way. Otherwise, if you get a bit kind of muddled up in all the different maybe this, that, other kind of stuff that you can do in English, it's not as easy with the word order in German. It was just easier to say yes, this, if that makes sense. So I don't know, I always find it just interesting to compare them as well. I suppose that's easier with, I suppose, English, French and German are quite linked. I always found it was interesting to see the differences, but also similarities, if that makes sense, between words, and trying also not to get them mixed up in my head when I'm trying to speak them. But yeah, no, I really do like languages. I had considered, unfortunately it wasn't possible in Edinburgh, but doing a language and computer science, but I've decided that could be kind of something on the side, if that makes sense. But yeah, no, see where I go. But I do think that could be an area that I might be interested in definitely looking into more things like natural language processing. Yeah, it's nice overlap between the two.
Well, you've got a lot of skills that could definitely be useful in a lot of different industries. So definitely you can. I mean, from my own experience, I went to uni for a year. I was then a dropout, which wasn't completely my fault, as my university lost a load of my work. But I went from studying, hopefully that won't happen for you. I went from studying fine art to then running a company in grounds maintenance and gardening, to then now not having much of my company left, but then being back painting a lot of my time. So, like, the world can just go in completely different directions.
Yes. I don't think that's a bad thing. A lot of people in my degree, maybe, I suppose, I don't know, they had computer science in school that they've been doing it. I feel like they've been coding since they were born, and they're very focused. They're doing this, they want a job with this company, and this is how they get there. Particularly with, I suppose there's a bit of a disconnect I'm finding between, I suppose, what we're learning in computer science group, particularly in Edinburgh, which is more theoretical, and what the focus, like, least code for the job, and it's all, a lot of people are very, very focused on that, and it's all, getting the internship at this company, and it's just like, personally it's too focused for me. I just want to try new things and not worry about that, just do what I can.
I don't think there's a right and a wrong. It's just, if you are someone that's worked out and knows what you want, go for it. If you still don't know, apply for internships that involve being involved in language, and then get involved in the algorithm side of things. So run with it and go with it, and I think either way it will work out well for you. So can you just run me through it? Obviously, in the book Exponential, Azeem mentions sort of the journey there, but what was the experience for you? Like, how did it come about? Did you know who Azeem Azhar was when you met him?
Oh yeah, so I suppose the exhibition is quite it's a weird couple of days. So you go in, like, it's an exhibition hall. It's got these really bright white lights. You go in, it's like early in the morning, so it's still dark. You leave late at night, it's dark, and it's all a bit of a weird experience. Especially as an individual project, sometimes you feel stuck to your stand. And I think the teacher was at the stand at the time. I think I just came back, and it was like, oh, someone's there to take. He was like, oh, do you want to take a photo? And I was like, okay. And he briefly talked about the project, but I didn't realize who he was at all, and I felt really bad at the time. I was a little bit out of it. I just thought, oh, someone who's interested in the project. But it was then he took a picture up to the stand and put it on his Twitter, and I think my teacher was maybe a little bit more clued in than I was at the time. He was like, oh, you know, he's got a bit of a following of the Twitter, and I was looking. I was like, wait a minute, this guy is big.
So it's literally just a case of you had your stand and he came over and was just interested, got talking.
Yeah, just like, oh, another person talking, okay. Get the spiel going. Eventually you learn off the general spiel. Now obviously it depends on, like, you can kind of generally gauge from someone how interested they are, and maybe, like, sometimes they say, oh, I don't know anything about this, so maybe you kind of run them a bit more slowly, but I could tell he was more, I suppose, good into what it was and very interested. So yeah, that was it. He took a quick photo, and it was only then when I realised that I could see on his Twitter, and then I did a bit more research on him, that he was a lot more of a thing, that he wasn't just a general member of the public, for example. He was a big thing. Yeah, no, it was a very interesting experience. In hindsight, I wish I'd taken more advantage of that, but yeah, no, it was a good experience, I suppose. I should try connect with him again, but yeah, no, it's good.
Amazing. Okay, well, Laura, thank you so much for giving me your time, and it's been an incredible experience. It's been great to learn more about your story and your journey, and I wish you all the best for your degree, and I can imagine it going a lot of places, and I imagine you'll have the difficulty in Too many options, probably. But
Yes.
one final question I always ask guests is, what is something that exists within the world today that you hope will one day be eradicated?
Wow. Oh no, that is a big question. Because when we talked about the cervical cancer, it's been at the back of my mind, but it is something that can be really eradicated.
I always enjoy asking the question because people have such... I always expect quite extreme things, but like cancers and such, but people give some really interesting answers. So it is an interesting question to ask. So no, if that's your answer you want to go for it. It's hugely relevant.
That's the thing I suppose it's sticking. I mean, there are a lot of things you've given an answer. It's almost saying one thing is almost a bit intimidating. But I suppose doing the research on it, discovering that it is something that's easily preventable, but it's also, unfortunately, I suppose there's quite a divide between, I suppose, more developed countries where they have access to screening and healthcare systems compared to other countries where that isn't available, and the fact that the HPV vaccine has been developed, but not every country has access to it. That I suppose it's something, and I'm trying to remember. I can't remember the exact statistics, but it is one of the most prevalent cancers in women in I suppose non-developed countries, and it can be quite, I suppose, ruthless when it develops to later stages. So something like that would be, I suppose, I do think it's something that it's very easily preventable, but more work needs to be done on that. And I think it's something, especially, there's also maybe an education aspect to it that, like, I was what age was I was 15, 16 when I first heard of it, and I'm living it out, like, that, things like that people need to be more aware of, screening and things like that work can be done, and it's there for the taking, really, and it can make a huge difference. So I suppose, cervical cancer would be... But I'm okay, biased because it's sticking at the back of my head because of the project.
Great answer. There's no right, there's no wrong. It's a great answer.
True. That works.
Thank you, Laura. And this has been a conversation where I've really seen how... I don't know how to word it. It's like sitting down with someone, having a conversation where they are so much more intelligent than me. And I'm just like hoping I can keep up, like hearing about things like what you're studying and what your hobbies are and just what you've had an interest in as a young person. I'm just like, I had a skateboard and I went around on a skateboard and played with my mates, and you're like coding.
I tried it once and I bought it was probably €20 or like £18 skateboard on the local, like, it was like Poundland, but obviously it wasn't called Poundland because it wasn't pounds, but I broke it like my first day, tried to do a trick, and that was the end of my skateboarding career. In hindsight, I wish I'd done more. At the end of the day, like, I'm trying, at the end of the day, if you just do stuff you enjoy, who cares about what other people think,
If you enjoy it, do it. No, that's amazing. Thank you so much, Laura.
Thank you so much for listening. Really hope you enjoyed the conversation and got as much value from it as I did. And of course, make sure to check out next week when you'll be hearing from Morgan Absher, the host of Two Hot Takes podcast. So that'll be an incredible show. Make sure to check out next week. And of course, let us know your thoughts, either in a review, a comment, and make sure to hit the subscribe button or follow button, whatever platform you're on. See you next week.